Today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, in the national media, we see Kamala Harris, a fresh new but old but new but old but new face, getting all kinds of new but old attention. We'll go into exactly what's happening here, as I know it's left several people scratching their head, myself included, wondering why she suddenly gets a 15 to 20 point bump in current approval rating just because she's become the presumptive nominee, even though she hasn't done anything or said anything to make people suddenly approve of her. That's that different than what she's been saying or doing. Kentucky Representative Daniel Grossberg is under investigation for inappropriate actions with women, and surprise that it doesn't involve stealing their clothes, supposedly. I'll explain what I mean by that. And then finally, Fayette County Schools buckles under the pressure from the public. And once the local media en masse started finally covering something we covered a week in advance of them catching wind of the story regarding them spending over $100,000 on an opening day, few-hour ceremony where they were paying a private school owner $26,000 to come in and speak. Ron Clark holding at Rupp Arena, where they went ahead and were spending about another $80,000 on the festivities that day, plus or minus more. But anyway, so they spent that money. We brought that to the attention. Now, finally, they're canceling it. We'll go into how the media's coverage over this, that what they're mad about has nothing really to do with an actual decisions around hosting the people or any of the kind of those issues. They care more about optics with the school choice amendment coming out. We're going to have all that and more today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. First, of course, if you want to keep hearing the show, obviously didn't have a show Monday. I got a little busy over the weekend with some other work. And quite honestly, this is, as many of you know, a labor of love to go ahead and continue doing the show. It's not necessarily something I make a whole lot of money off of. So if you'd like to keep hearing the show, you got to make sure you're sharing it with others. The more people that listen, the more likely we are to be more reliable on turning out shows. So please make sure you do that. Share it with others. Leave a 5-star review. Those kinds of things certainly help push us forward. So going back now to Kamala Harris, a horrible, awful, horrible person. And she's bad for a number of reasons, of course, whether it's the fact that she's, a sociopath who climbs the political ladder, that she lies about what she believes in. I mean, most politicians lie, of course, about what they believe in. The fact that she's willing to drive the country apart if it leads, of course, to her getting more power. All those things make her awful. The other thing that makes her pretty awful is she speaks in a word salad, as I covered in the show earlier this week. And of course, she has that horrible laugh that many people find very off-putting for a lot of obvious reasons. But despite all that horribleness, something that we generally as a country kind of agreed upon. I mean, she had some of the worst approval ratings for a vice president in history. Awful. People's general opinion of her was pretty low. But despite that, Joe Biden steps down, hands off the torch to her to go ahead and run for office in his stead. She's the presumptive nominee for the Democrat Party. And all of a sudden, she hasn't done or said anything. She's just existed. And yet, simply by becoming the nominee, her approval ratings go up 10 and 15 points. That means people approving of the job she's currently doing, even though it was just a span of a few weeks. And so you're like, oh man, she's awful at her job, awful at her job. Then suddenly, because she becomes the nominee for president, people are like, well, maybe she's not so bad about her job. That's either some mass psychosis going on or a whole lot of gaslighting, or maybe even something a little bit more cynical when we take a look at why this push to make Kamala Harris might be just a facade. So let's break down a few of these things. I mean, and what I mean by what's weird about her rise in polling and, of course, this supposed excitement is I generally follow mainstream media and I also follow leftist Twitter. And what I hear them talking about a whole lot is just random. I'm not really seeing any videos of her talking about policy being circulated anywhere. I'm not seeing anything of people explaining what she has done that makes them support her so much suddenly. They're not explaining any of her accomplishments. Nothing at all. And I'm seeing this, like I said, on leftist Twitter. It's just simply that, oh, she's fresh, she's face, she's black, she's a woman. So great, so amazing, with no explanation why. And of course, they're trying to do several things along the way that are kind of cringy, of course, but the left trying to use their social media influence to go ahead and push this out there. They're of course trying to claim that Republicans are weird for, living our lives like normal human beings have lived their lives for like the last thousands of years. But suddenly, if you don't think a dude with a beard wearing a dress should be called a woman and be addressed like a woman and has somehow the same womanliness as an actual biological woman, well, that makes you weird. That's the claim, of course, from the left. They're trying that out. They're also trying out these processes of taking Kamala Harris's foibles, like where she says weird things like, what just happened? You fell out of a coconut tree? Like those kinds of things, and make them into a meme for the left, kind of like they tried to do with, angry Joe Biden that would whisper and yell into the mic. And of course, that's weird, that's strange, but they want to go ahead and try to make that into an asset, take the negative, try to make it a positive, and in doing so, of course, try to gaslight the American people into believing that those foibles are actually cool things, not things you should be concerned about. Now, there's a reason why you may be seeing this unified push on social media. Recently, the Harris campaign has come under fire with some complaints being filed to the FEC, Federal Elections Commission, over her illegally paying her campaign, not her, but obviously her campaign, illegally paying social media influencers to post positive things about Kamala Harris and to push her campaign out there online. So one of the reasons why social media is because it's very possible and likely that the campaign is paying a lot of these people to go ahead and make those posts. And the FEC, of course, is going to investigate or at least look into it. But the complaints actually name the companies that the Harris campaign has been paying. And so when we see some of these reports come out of spending and everything else, we'll be able to confirm this. But I do believe what we will see is that she has been paying a lot of social media influencers in order to go ahead and try to say and get them to say nice things about Kamala Harris. The other thing you hear people talking about is how many people are showing up to her events or on these Zoom calls, like these white dudes for Harris calls, and hundreds of thousands of people are showing up, supposedly, etc., etc. One thing to remember about these Zoom calls and these events that she's having, one thing about the Zoom calls is that there is no guarantee that those 200,000 people are real people, are not one person logged into 10 accounts, 100 times over, to make it seem like a lot more people are logged into 20 accounts 100 times over, to make it seem like a lot more people. That isn't the first time it's been done in politics, of course. And when you look at the political events, much like Hillary Clinton did, Kamala Harris is having people like Megan Thee Stallion, which for those of you who don't know, she reportedly is a female rapper. I say that because obviously a stallion is a male horse. So I guess she's Megan the male horse, which is very confusing because she doesn't claim to be transgender. So it's a very weird situation there. But anyways, putting that to the side. So she's doing concerts with Megan Thee Stallion to bring in people and other famous individuals. And like I said, Hillary Clinton did the same thing in order to get people to show up to these events to make it look like they're supporting her, and they're not. They're just there for the free concert. There's no guarantee because they showed up to hear Megan Thee Stallion that they're going to show up to the polls for Kamala Harris. Though it's not per se impossible that they do. It's just not necessarily that kind of transfer of people showing up to vote hasn't always been super strong, especially too this year where there's less opportunity for some of that mail-in voting and for some of that early voting that we saw during the COVID era. That will be harder for people to go ahead and convert these low propensity voters into high propensity voters. It could be difficult for the Democrats to go ahead and do that. So, that's people showing up. That's people showing up to these calls. But another thing that we'll see sometimes is the donations. And we've heard a lot about how Kamala Harris is breaking all kinds of one-day fundraising records. People are super duper excited about her. But I think it cannot be understated the amount at which people had been holding back on donating to Joe Biden and to the Democrats this campaign cycle. So let's rewind to 2016. In 2016, Hillary Clinton raised $976 million, almost $1 billion. And Trump raised right around $550 million. So he had about half the money that Hillary Clinton did. He still won, obviously, in 2016. That's a fair amount of money. Then fast forward to 2020, 4 years later. Joe Biden brings in $1.6 billion. Trump now brings in $1.1 billion. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that he's the incumbent. And so, there's an incumbency factor there of trying to get on the good side of the guy you think at least has a pretty good chance of winning, because obviously a lot of people didn't think Donald Trump would have the chance of winning per se in 2016. And so not as many donors came out of the woodwork. More will come out once you're the incumbent. It's much easier to raise donations because they think it's more likely you get reelected, of course. So he raised $1.1 billion to Joe Biden's $1.6 billion. Now in 2024, Trump and Kamala Harris have right now about the same amount raised at just right around about $500 million or so. They have the same amount raised because Kamala Harris got to take over Joe Biden's campaign account. So when I say they've been holding back, if we're to look at this comparatively speaking, what we should see is Trump raising maybe somewhere around $750,000 to $800,000 this round. Of course, he's been a little bit better in the polls than he was in 2016 most of the time. And on top of that, he was the president before. On top of that, there's a lot more people that have seen the economy work that Trump has done that'd be willing to donate. So, but he's not the incumbent. So I think you might see him raise probably $750,000, $800,000. But I think that you'll see Kamala Harris, especially with this fresh new face situation going on, she will probably raise more than Trump by a fair amount. So the Democrats have been holding back money because of Joe Biden. They didn't trust him. They go ahead and now they're dumping that money that they would have dumped in anyways. And that's creating this belief that Kamala Harris has all this excitement about her, as you're seeing all these money bombs and $2 million raised on a Zoom call and $80 million raised in 24 hours and all these claims. Now we go over to the polls, and you're seeing the polls. And the media is picking and choosing a lot of the polls they'll tell you about. And you watch the polls and how they're conducted, and it definitely gives you some questions. I mean, you can go over to 538, which is a kind of a central database there of polling information on the Trump-Kamala Harris campaign. You'll see vastly different oscillating polls. Some say Trump's leading by 5 points. Some say Kamala Harris is leading by 2 points. You'll see just this massive oscillating difference based upon how many voters they looked at. Are they likely voters? Are they just registered voters? And that's the other thing that's difficult to claim, is how do you predict who's going to show up in this presidential election? Presidential elections are weird polling-wise for that reason, in that you need people to show up to vote for your person, and people will show up to vote on a presidential election year that don't normally show up to vote at all. And so when we work in politics and we're doing things like mailers and ads and targeting people on social media, we're looking for things like, have they voted in 3 out of the last 4 generals, 4 out of the last 4 generals, 2 out of the last 4 generals? But if you're a presidential candidate, it's very likely that many of the people turning up to vote for you only vote every 4 years. On top of that, it's very likely that it's a lot of people's first time voting. If they're showing up, if they're over the age of 18 and they're voting now in the presidential election, it's very likely that it's their first time voting. And so they wouldn't fall into the category of likely voter. And what's interesting is when we just see registered voter, we actually see Trump doing pretty well in the general election in a lot of areas that otherwise he wouldn't be doing well in. I'll give you an example. Here's a July 29th through 30th polling of registered voters in Arizona that was done by the Progressive Action Fund. And that is a Democrat-funded polling group, so they lean to the left. And they show President Trump having a 2-point lead in Arizona that was just finished being conducted yesterday. So it was just posted today, showing Trump with a 2-point lead in Arizona, surveying registered voters. But now, if we look at an older poll in Arizona, and by older, I mean a day older, by Bloomberg, in Arizona, what do we see? We see Harris having a 4-point lead in Arizona. So how is it that a poll that was conducted between 24th and 28th shows Harris with a 4-point lead, that now you supposedly same group of voters, there's 618 registered voters in Arizona. This is a leftist polling firm too, showed Trump with a 2-point lead in Arizona, 618 registered voters, July 29th through 30th. Then you go back to the Morning Consult Bloomberg poll, which was conducted from the 24th through the 28th, so literally just 4 days prior to this other poll in Arizona, doing 804 registered voters. The other one did around 650 registered voters. So it's, comparable amounts in the world of polling. They're not doing above 1,000, they're not doing 10,000 or anything like that. They're doing 800 registered voters here. And they're showing Harris with a 4-point lead. That's a 6-point swing over the supposedly same voting group over those few days. So what's happened? Well, one thing could be that Harris's sheen is, of course, losing. She's losing her attractiveness to people as time wears on. And so that little bump now has gone back down. The other thing is how are these groups actually trying to identify who the voters are in order to create an outcome? And the media has a vested interest in creating an outcome in this situation. They need Kamala Harris to win. But if they think she can't actually win due to polls and everything else, they're hoping they could at least maybe guilt you in to voting for her by making a bandwagon type action. Everybody's supporting her. Everybody's voting for her. Look at all the polls. She's covered all this ground. Everybody approves of her now. Oh, look how amazing she is. Look at all these social media posts. They're creating a false world for the voters who actually don't want to vote for her to live in, to try to force them to live with her, to vote for her. And I think this is going to end up blowing up in their face, because remember what happened in 2016. All the polls got it wrong to Trump's favor. Why? Because people were afraid of saying that they're going to vote for President Trump. And now, as they're creating this other false narrative of peer pressure and political pressure to try to get you, all the stars, everybody's going to come out and say, vote for Kamala Harris, she's great, oh, she's amazing. Even though you can't even put your finger on what she's done, they're going to try to get you, maybe not you wouldn't fall for it, but they're going to try to convince the voter to go ahead and feel shame if they want to vote for Trump, which will create the same polling skew. That is why going into November, Trump is even remotely close to a 50-50 average on the popular vote at the national level. It is over for Kamala Harris. That is my prediction. If he is close to a 50-50 mark, because I guarantee you they will be underpolling his actual percentages, because people will be afraid once again to say they want to vote for him, because at the end of the day, and this is what this election will come down to, are you, not you, but are the voters dumb enough to actually fall for this? Are they dumb enough to take a person who they all hated a month ago, who was awful on the border, who's been a part of a failing administration that has made their lives miserable, costs go up, has done nothing but cause expenses and make the everyday American struggle more? Are they going to go ahead and forgive those discretions by the Biden administration and forget that Kamala Harris was a part of that and forget her failures and go ahead and vote for hers? Will they be peer pressured into it? Will they be gaslit into voting for somebody they shouldn't? I don't know. That's the question. And the media's buy-in here is that they have to be right about Joe Biden having been the problem. They need Kamala Harris to win. Otherwise, they could be losing their leftist listening base that say, you pushed out Biden. Biden could have beat Trump. And now you have Kamala Harris to deal with, who's even worse. So they need her to be better, or at least appear to be better, if they want to keep their base of viewership. Moving away from national politics, though, Daniel Grossberg, he's a representative out of Louisville, State House representative. He's in his first term, is now under investigation for inappropriate interactions with women. This from the Herald Leader. It's by Alex Akisto and Austin Horn. Reading now from the Herald Leader article. Representative Daniel Grossberg is under investigation by the state's Legislative Research Commission for inappropriate interactions with women. The Herald Leader confirmed Tuesday evening 4 sources have independently shared their stories and details of the state's investigation with the Herald Leader. 3 of the sources are women who said they have been contacted within the past 2 weeks by Legislative Research Commission staffers, including lawyers. They've been asked about specific actions, questionable behavior, and text messages sent by Grossberg, a first-term Democrat from Louisville. The women shared text messages with the Herald Leader from Grossberg. They described as weird or creepy. They often came late at night, and Grossberg remarked on their physical looks. He complimented one for her exotic appearance and described how beautiful another one was. Now, this is departing from the article for a second. This isn't super shocking from Grossberg. Those of you who've listened to the show may have heard his name come up once or twice or 3 times over the past year or two. Grossberg, he had, the first time he really came up in the show was because he had wrote in a gay LGBTQ publication back when he was in college that he was reportedly a transgender female. Supposedly, I mean, it was his name that wrote the article at the date that he was at that college. It all lined up with when he was there, the name, the person, everything. This became a big to-do. Grossberg, according to my knowledge, never once denied the allegations that, of course, they, that he was identifying as transgender at the time. It's not, he's a weird guy. He's a creepy, weird guy already, just from that sheer fact. But he grew out of his transgenderness, so reported transgenderness from college. He got married, he's got kids, and he's now, of course, a state legislator. And then the other time he's come up in the show is when he mentioned that Donald Trump would have tribunals and execute everyone. A week or 2 ago, I talked about this, and it came up on the show, and I played for you what he had to say in regards to, he was on Terry Miner's show talking about how Donald Trump's going to have tribunals, and then admitted later on that he was, maybe that was a little, whatever. But anyway, so creepy, weird, odd. The guy is, it isn't shocking. I'll say that. It isn't shocking if these allegations turn out to be true. Now, on Tuesday evening, Grossberg denied any wrongdoing. He says, "I never in my work approached or crossed a line." crossed a line, cross-dressing. Anyways, a line in my professional communications. Any claim that private texts on my personal cell phone are work-related have no merit. I steadfastly deny any impropriety, Grossberg said in a statement released by his Frankfurt lawyer, Anna Weitz. All of the text messages were reviewed in their entirety by the Herald Leader to ensure their authenticity. Grossberg, 45, is married. A 4th source in Frankfurt, direct knowledge of the allegations and investigation, also confirmed the Legislative Research Commission is looking into Grossberg's conduct. The Herald Leader is not identifying the sources because of the nature of the allegations and the sexually charged text messages the paper has reviewed with the 3 women. The 3 contacted by state investigators work for nonprofit advocacy organizations or lobbying firms and are not state employees. However, they interact routinely with legislators, including Grossberg and Frankfurt, and are afraid of potential personal and professional retribution, they said. Now, this is an interesting point. So, surprise, surprise, the people that he's reportedly sending sexually charged text messages to and being sexually inappropriate with are lobbyists. And I think Grossberg's biggest shame here and biggest problem for him here is the fact that, honestly, Democrats aren't in power. If I'm to be honest, if a Republican was doing the same thing, and trust me, I 100% will tell you, Republicans will, probably currently are doing the same exact behavior with lobbyists. There is a reason why these lobbying firms will try to hire attractive young women to go into these male legislators' offices. It's because we are electing some of the most morally flexible individuals on the planet. And of course they are. They have to be. How do you raise $150,000, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 in some situations in the House to an individual's campaign without that person being extremely morally flexible? A good, upstanding, honest person in politics isn't getting outside money to dump $400,000 into their campaign. They're not getting somebody to dump $115,000 into their campaign. I mean, you can take somebody like, I don't know, Representative Meredith out of Bowling Green. He, of course, had a race against Kelsey Rock down there in his district. He did win re-election. But through that process, there was $400,000 spent somewhere around there, a difficult amount of money to overcome. Where do you think that money comes from? You think these are honest, good, upstanding people that just happen across a couple $100,000? People are not, this isn't a charity. You know, people aren't giving money to these politicians out of the goodness of their hearts. They're giving money to these politicians because they're buying their votes. They're buying their policies. So yes, this stuff happens because our politicians suck. And we keep voting for them, of course, because the reason why that money works, and they'll do anything for that money, they'll go ahead and do anything for it, because your vote can be bought off with a mail or a TV ad. Maybe not your vote, of course. You're listening to the show. You're probably more well-informed, but the vast masses will allow their votes to be bought. And that's how money ends up coming in and ruining politics. But besides that, in order to, you have the money aspect, but the other thing they like to do, especially to the male representatives, is dangle out these attractive young women to come in and push for their individual things that they want to get done. And the bad part for Daniel Grossberg is he's not a Republican right now. If he's Republican and in power, the chances that anybody would be even cooperating with this investigation and talking to the media is significantly lower, because of course they need them to get the bills passed. But in this situation, the Democrats, they're not really in power, and Grossberg overstepped. And like I said, of course, this is awful. Now, less than 90 minutes, this is back to the Herald Leader. After 90 minutes, the first version of this story posted on Kentucky.com, a spokesperson for the House Democrats released a statement saying they've asked Grossberg to step away from the caucus during the investigation. We take these claims seriously and are deeply troubled by them, and have asked Representative Grossberg to step away from the caucus as this moves forward. With due process in mind, we are discussing next steps, the statement reads. The three leaders of the House Democrats include Minority Leader Derek Graham, Caucus Chair Sherilyn Stevenson, and Whip Rachel Roberts. Whites defended Grossberg. I would be surprised if there was any intentional inappropriate misconduct. He's really, I think, a good guy. He's a principled man. He has a happy marriage. What does unintentional inappropriate misconduct even mean? I'd be surprised if there was any intentional inappropriate misconduct. So he accidentally misconducted himself around women is maybe possibly it, is the lawyer saying? Well, he's a good guy. I'm sure he just said, you're real beautiful at midnight because, he just wanted her to feel good, if that's what he really said, as these reports are saying. He just wanted her to feel good. Ain't no guy messaging no girl at midnight things like you're so beautiful and exotic because they're a really good guy in a happy marriage who honors his wife and the commitment he made to monogamy with his wife. Ain't no guy doing that. It's not happening. Going back to the article, the Legislative Research Commission, known routinely in the state house circles as LRC, serves as the state's legislature's administrative arm and oversees hundreds of legislative branch employees. It is empowered to respond to whistleblower allegations and matters of professional and personal conduct. The extent of the agency's investigation is unclear. A spokesperson for the commission neither confirmed nor denied that Grossberg was under investigation. Your question is not something we typically comment on. The spokesperson wrote in a Tuesday email to the Herald Leader. Anna White said Grossberg met with state officials on Tuesday. She characterized the meeting as informal and not an official investigation. She said their message to Grossberg was to be a little kinder and more respectful in his communications with staff. The state agency is tasked with reviewing and investigating complaints of harassment and grievances coming from its own staff, according to a copy of the organization's personnel policy. All LRC employees, including legislators, are required to undergo periodic anti-harassment training, according to the agency's personnel statement, which is fascinating. Fascinating. Now, the Democrat Party chair had made a quote. He says, the series of allegations made against Representative Daniel Grossberg are unsettling. Kentucky Democrat Party has zero tolerance for sexual harassment, any form of sexual misconduct. Do you, though, have zero tolerance? Because you seem to be perfectly fine with things like exposing kids to drag performers and having kids shove dollar bills down into their clothing. In fact, that is something you campaign on. So this claim of you're against zero tolerance for any kind of sexual misconduct seems a little much. But anyways, every individual should be held accountable for their own actions, particularly those who represent Kentuckians in the hall of our Capitol. So, he's under investigation, inappropriate conversations. He has been kicked out of caucus before. Reportedly, it was supposedly for him push for a resolution condemning the support of Hamas. That's what Grossberg's lawyer says. However, leadership says no. She later said that she conflated leadership's alleged displeasure over the resolution and the contemporaneous ethics question regarding whether or not a personal vehicle purchase was appropriate or not. So, this guy generally gets in trouble, apparently, with ethics. Not allowed in the caucus doors often, which is interesting because I actually don't think there's a whole host of a lot of Republicans who don't get allowed into the caucus meetings occasionally. Of course, Republicans have had their issues. You had Robert Goforth and the Ethernet strangling incident, and you've had, of course, the issues that State Representative Michael Meredith was involved in, involving the sexual misconduct around a staffer from the Republicans. So it's not like Republicans never do this thing. It's just that they don't typically ban them out of the caucus meeting. So take that for what it means. Now, those of you who listen to the show on a regular basis know that last week or so, 2 weeks ago or so, I reported on the Fayette County schools. A concerned citizen had done an open records request and found that they were paying $26,500 to one Ron Clark, who is in charge of a private school in Atlanta. And on top of that, they were then paying Rupp Arena for him to speak at, and this laundry list of issues. Overall, according to open records, the entire ceremony was going to cost reportedly over $100,000. And when it broke that they were paying so much, while at the same time they're making cuts like, art classes at Cassidy Elementary School in Lexington, that started to be a lot of ire. And the media started calling them out. The local media started pointing out that this was going on. And so the school went ahead and canceled the event. Now they're claiming that they aren't losing anything on deposits or anything else. I find that hard to believe. The contracts that they signed state and involve the cancellation policies that they do have to pay. And I've never heard of a venue or a speaker who would refund every single penny when you cancel an event like less than 2 weeks out from it. I've never heard of it. I've heard of things where maybe they say, okay, you can cancel it and get an 80% refund and we keep a 20% deposit, or we keep your deposit or whatever. But I've never heard of them just full on forgiving the entire thing. So I'm a little dubious over Fayette County Public Schools claims that they will get the return of the money. But on top of that, the media is upset. Linda Blackford wrote some articles about it. Now, one of the things I want to zero in on, though, is in one of the articles, Linda Blackford brought up on how, these things add up. $20,000 for a speaker, $80,000 for a venue, $80,000 for rebranding. Fayette County Public Schools decided to rebrand. I guess they decided the tagline of "It's about the kids" doesn't accurately describe their schooling philosophies anymore. So therefore, they needed new logos, new branding. They spent $80,000, according to open records requests, on rebranding the school. So you end up adding that up, you're getting to like 200 grand now and just wasted expenses just right there. They just purchased another, several $1 million worth piece of property that they don't even know what they're doing with it. They just said, well, we decided to go ahead and purchase it now, even though they have no necessary plans for it. And you start to see these things. And the media points out that they shouldn't do these things. Not because, of course, it's bad fiscal behavior, not because it's the taxpayer funds and you should be more careful with them, but because there is a school choice amendment on the ballot. And when schools like Lexington and Louisville and a lot of these other big city schools, where there's such a liberal concentration, where Democrats are hoping to build a good chunk of their coalition to fight against the school choice amendment, well, when they run into schooling systems that are bringing on the ire of their communities in the way that Fayette County Public Schools has, it makes it harder to defeat that amendment. And so they're saying you need to not do these things while this amendment is being debated. And I'd hazard a guess to say if it wasn't for the fact that this amendment's coming forward, and therefore now the public schools, in this case, the Fayette County Public Schools, can claim that, oh, no, we are responsive to the people. It's kind of like, once again, a politician running for re-election. They act super responsive and care, and they show up in their community and they'll talk to you for as long as you're useful to them. But then the moment you become not useful to them, well, that now, they're no longer responsive to you. So they're going to be responsive to citizens' concerns because this amendment's on the ballot. They don't want it to pass. But the minute it's passed, they're going to go back to their old ways, which goes into how do we keep a school system that's responsive to the parents, responsive to the community? School choice is that answer. Because when you have the option to take your kids elsewhere and you look and you say, look, you're cutting art class while at the same time paying $100,000 to have some guy from a private school come speak, you know what, I'm taking my kid elsewhere. Well, then it makes them double think. It makes them think twice about what they're doing. Well, y'all, that's what we got time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Back here tomorrow. Hope you have a great rest of your day.